Welcome back to the Sports Source. This segment brought to you by Parkside Cabin Rentals. The weather is about to cool down a bit. The leaves will soon be turning, and there's no better place to enjoy cooler temperatures and fall colors than the Great Smoky Mountains. Visit ParksideCabinRentals.com today to select the best cabin for you, your family, your group of friends. Then book your fall stay. Parkside Cabin Rentals. Okay. What a bizarre and awful week for college sports if you're a fan of any kind of tradition, if you care at all about athletes having to travel, if you care about parents and fans getting to see the teams that they follow. It is terrible. Also, let this be the end of all, I believe Seth Emerson wrote this to The Athletic, and I agree wholeheartedly, let this be the end of every school and school administrator whining and crying about players getting NIL. Shut up. You don't get to say a word. You're taking every last dollar and you're screwing everybody in the process. If anything, I'm not for this NIL stuff to go nuts, but now, just to serve them right, I hope it does. Unionize, go on strike, boys. Go for the money. That's what the schools are doing. Why am I so ticked off? Take a look at just what's happened with these conferences now. We'll start with the Big 12 conference. All right? They had 10 teams. Then Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC. So in the last 2 years, they have added 8 teams. So this is 2024. Any of those teams that have the white border around there, those are new. Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah moved over there this week, in addition to Cincinnati, UCF, BYU, and Houston, who will start this year with the Big 12. So it's actually 16 teams. They went from 10 in the Big 12 to 16 in the Big 12. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, now let's take a look at the Big Ten. The other conference that jumped in and killed off the Pac-12. They went out and everybody thought they were crazy to add USC and UCLA last year, and now they've gone out and added Oregon and Washington as well. So they've got a West Coast wing. That league stretches from from Eugene, Oregon, and Seattle, Washington, to Rutgers. I think that's East Brunswick, New Brunswick, New Jersey. Just bizarre what they've got going on. But they didn't want to make the move that killed the Pac-12. They didn't want it to look that way. Got news for you. You killed the Pac-12. So you can say you didn't want it to look that way, but you did it. Speaking of the Pac-12, let's look at this miserable collection of poor freaks. California and Stanford are two of the best overall athletic departments in the country. They are located in the 5th largest TV market in the country, and no one wants them because their football isn't a big brand. Oregon State and Washington State, they're doomed. There are people who've talked in the past about, wouldn't it be cool if you had relegation in college sports? Well, you just had it. You just added Houston, bigger TV market, UCF, Orlando, Cincinnati obviously, and then BYU, which is the Mormon equivalent of Notre Dame as a national university. And then out of that Power 5 grouping goes Cal, Stanford, Washington State, and Oregon State. Who knows where they'll land? Maybe the Big Ten circles back and gets Cal and Stanford. Oregon State and Washington State, they're going to be laying people off left and right in that athletic department because if they move to the Mountain West, they're going to make millions less than they did in the Pac-12. All right, let's look at the SEC. Greg Sankey came out this week and said, look, we're just focused on Oklahoma and Texas. We aren't focused on adding anything. But there you see those two bordered in white because that will be your league next year, we assume. But you look into the Atlantic Coast Conference, Florida State said this week that we're going to get out of here if they don't give us more money. If we don't make more money than everybody else in this league, we're leaving, which had the North Carolina athletic director saying that doesn't help anybody. I've highlighted North Carolina and Virginia there because those are two schools that you keep hearing rumors that everybody in the Big Ten is after them, that everybody in the SEC is after them. So that'll come up at some point. But to show you how crazy this whole thing has become, Florida State is now considering partnering with a private equity firm in order to raise more funds. So you're going to have an athletic department tied to a private equity firm.
What are we Saudi Arabia?
Yeah, we talked about that a few weeks ago. How long until the Saudis come in? Heck, if they'd showed up this week, they could have bought it at the Pac-12 conference.
That's what I thought about.
Maybe they should have done it. Josh, how does this impact the SEC? You look at this, does this impact the SEC and UT? Or is the SEC in the best shape possible compared to the Big Ten right now? When you look at all this, I'll just let you take it where you want to go. I'm throwing you millions of questions. You answer the one you like. Does this impact the SEC? Do you think the SEC is in as good a position as it was, say, a month ago?
As you said at the very beginning of the segment, this is about money, right?
Yep.
That's the only reason these decisions are being made, well, I think the SEC immediately will look and say, okay, what's the Big Ten going to get out of this financially? Where does that leave us? What can we do next? So even if we hear this past week, well, the SEC wants to hold tight. Okay, well, that was last week.
That's also what the Big Ten was saying the day before adding Oregon and Washington.
Exactly. You can go less than 24 hours and everything can change. So I take that with a grain of salt, not the reporting of it, because I think that's true at the time, but I think it just changes so quickly. So everybody's trying to get as much money as they can. And right now the SEC might find we can't get as much as we want, but they want more. They all want more. So if that opportunity comes up, and there'll be the TV side of this conversation coming up in this show, then that can change everything. And the SEC next week can say, you know what, Florida State or Virginia or North Carolina, let's go after them. Let's try to get them.
What I wonder about, guys, is in the fall of 2024, when you expand to 12 teams in the playoffs, the Big Ten, I think, is either on equal or maybe even a step up from the SEC in the eyes of the selection committee. And even though you're going to 12 teams, I'm thinking it's going to make it tougher for a lot of people because the Big Ten and how they're viewed and what you added to the Big Ten.
Their strength of schedule is going to look pretty good.
Exactly.
Now when you're playing those kinds of teams. Does this have an impact on the SEC in Tennessee yet?
Well, I don't think yet, but here's the thing, and it kind of goes with what Josh is saying. The SEC is not in real good position right now to try to go ahead Florida State and Virginia or somebody else. Why? Because they're stuck with ESPN. ESPN's not floating out a whole bunch of money out there. They have exclusivity, right? Mm-hmm. So they can't say, well, we'll pull this money from Fox, we'll pull this money from this entity or that entity. So how are you going to add teams? What you're doing is if you add teams, that means fewer money, less money for Tennessee or Florida or Georgia or Alabama because you can't get more money out of ESPN.
I want to get back to that. Well, hold on. We'll do another segment on that. That's a good point. Vince,
that is a great point. Another factor is obviously money is the number one thing. Like where are you going to be money-wise? But after that, it's access into the playoff. And what is going to be? Are they going to change automatic qualifiers? Is it going to be stacked to where now it's wide open? If it's wide open and say they take out the automatic qualifiers, the SEC is going to feel like, okay, that's our advantage still. We don't have to make moves. So I think there's a little bit of that side factor in addition to the money for the
It depends on how you look. Go ahead.
Does the Pac-12 still get an automatic qualifying team?
Really?
right.
Out of 4 teams.
4 out of 4.
If you're looking at it from a football sense, I think the SEC's fine. You got one thing that all this stuff can change. One thing's going to remain the same. You're located in the spot where people view football as a religion and where the athletes are. Mm-hmm. That's not going to change. So you got that benefit. But if you're looking at it from a business sense and who's going to make more money and who's going to be able to lure teams from the ACC that they want, I don't think that's the SEC. I think that's the Big Ten. Let's get into that next. When we come back, all these schools screwing over their fans and their players and everybody else for money, how many of these schools have actually taken their money and become a big dog? We'll discuss that. Everybody wants the money. Oh, it's game changing. Whose game has it changed? Because I still see the same old teams at the top of the top 10 list. Come on back on the Sports Source.